Ricardo Morales pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway of the Riverside Performing Arts Center. The wheels squeaked slightly as they rolled over the shiny marble floor. It was 10:30 at night and the building was quiet now. Just 2 hours ago, this same hallway had been filled with people in fancy clothes. Women wore long dresses and sparkly jewelry. Men wore dark suits and shiny shoes. They had all come to watch an opera performance, but Ricardo had not seen the show. He never did. His job started when everyone else went home. He stopped at the first trash can and pulled out the plastic bag inside. People always left so much trash behind. Empty water bottles, crumpled programs, candy wrappers, and sometimes even half-eaten snacks. Ricardo tied the bag and put it in the large bin on his cart. Then he put a fresh bag in the trash can. Ricardo had been doing this job for 7 years. 7 long years of cleaning up after other people. He knew every corner of this building. He knew which bathroom faucet dripped. He knew which door squeaked when you opened it. He knew where the light switches were even in the dark. The other workers at the theater barely noticed him. When they passed him in the hallways during the day, some would nod. Most just walked by like he was not there. He was the janitor. He was part of the building, like the walls and the floors. People looked at him but did not really see him. Ricardo did not mind too much. He was a quiet man. He kept to himself. He did his work well and went home. But sometimes late at night when he cleaned the empty theater, he felt a deep ache in his chest. It was the ache of a dream that seemed impossible. Tonight, Ricardo finished cleaning the hallways and pushed his cart toward the main theater. This was his favorite part of the building. The theater had red velvet seats arranged in curved rows. A huge chandelier hung from the ceiling, covered in hundreds of tiny lights that looked like diamonds. The stage was wide and deep with heavy curtains the color of wine. Ricardo walked down the center aisle, his footsteps quiet on the thick carpet. The theater could hold 800 people, but now it was empty and silent. He liked it best this way. When the theater was full, it belonged to the rich people who could afford tickets. But at night, when everyone was gone, it felt like it belonged to him. He started picking up the programs that people had left on their seats. Some programs were folded neatly. Others were crumpled or torn. He found a lipstick-stained tissue, a forgotten scarf, and a child's toy car. All of these went into his trash bag. As he worked, Ricardo began to hum quietly. It was a melody from an opera he loved. He had listened to it so many times that he knew every note by heart. His humming grew a little louder as he moved from row to row. Then, when he was sure he was completely alone, Ricardo began to sing. His voice was soft at first, just above a whisper. But as he gained confidence, he let his voice grow stronger. The words were in Italian, a language he had learned phonetically by listening to recordings over and over again. His voice filled the empty theater, bouncing off the walls and rising up to the high ceiling. For these few moments, Ricardo was not a janitor. He was a performer. He was the star on the stage that everyone had come to see. This was Ricardo's secret. This was the thing that kept him going through the long nights and tired days. He loved opera more than anything else in the world. The love had started when he was just a little boy, living with his grandmother in a small apartment far away from this city. His grandmother had been a cleaning woman too, just like Ricardo was now. She worked hard every day, scrubbing floors and washing windows in office buildings. But his grandmother had one treasure. She had a collection of old vinyl records, opera records. She had saved money little by little to buy them from second-hand shops. On Sunday afternoons, when she did not have to work, she would play those records on her old record player. Young Ricardo would sit on the floor and listen. The voices that came from those scratchy records were like magic to him. They were powerful and beautiful. They made him feel things he could not explain. Sometimes the music made him want to cry. Other times it made him feel like he could do anything. His grandmother would tell him stories about the operas as they listened. She explained who was singing, what they were singing about, and why the music made people feel so much. She told him about the great opera houses in Europe, places with names he could barely pronounce. Places that seemed as far away as the moon. Maybe one day you will sing in places like that, his grandmother would say, her wrinkled hand patting his head gently. Ricardo had believed her then. As a child, everything seemed possible. But life had other plans. When Ricardo was 12, his grandmother died. He went to live with his uncle, who did not care about opera or music. His uncle thought such things were a waste of time. Music does not put food on the table, his uncle would say. Learn to work with your hands. That is what matters. Ricardo finished school, but there was no money for college. There was certainly no money for music lessons or singing teachers. He took whatever jobs he could find. He washed dishes in restaurants. He worked in warehouses, lifting heavy boxes. He did construction work, digging ditches under the hot sun. Through all of this, Ricardo never forgot his grandmother's opera records. He never forgot the feeling he had when he listened to those beautiful voices. In his heart, the dream stayed alive, even though it seemed like it would never come true. When he was 25, Ricardo moved to the city. He was looking for a better life, better opportunities. He found the job at the Riverside Performing Arts Center. It was just a cleaning job, but to Ricardo it felt special. He would be close to music, close to opera, even if he was only cleaning up after the performances. On his first day of work, his supervisor, Mr. Chen, showed him around the building. When they walked through the main theater, Ricardo had stopped and stared. He had never seen anything so beautiful. The red seats, the golden decorations on the walls, the magnificent stage. It took his breath away. Keep moving, Mr. Chen had said, not understanding why Ricardo was standing there with his mouth open. We have a lot of building to cover. That first week, Ricardo learned his duties. Empty the trash, mop the floors, clean the bathrooms, wipe down the seats, make sure everything was perfect before the staff arrived in the morning. It was hard work, but Ricardo did not complain. He quickly noticed something wonderful about his job. The theater had speakers in almost every room. They used them to play music while people arrived for shows and during intermissions, but late at night when Ricardo was cleaning, he could still hear faint echoes of music from the sound system that someone had forgotten to turn off completely. One night, about 2 months after he started the job, Ricardo found something that changed everything. He was cleaning a storage room backstage when he discovered shelves full of old opera recordings. There were CDs and even some old cassette tapes, programs from past performances, books about famous opera singers. Ricardo's heart had pounded with excitement. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he carefully picked up one of the CDs. It was a recording of an opera called La Bohème. He had heard his grandmother talk about this one. From that night on, Ricardo would bring a small portable CD player to work. His cousin had given it to him years ago and it still worked. While he cleaned, he would listen to the opera recordings through his earbuds. He listened to the same pieces over and over, learning the melodies, understanding the emotions. He started going to the public library on his days off. There he found books about music and singing. He learned about breathing techniques. He learned about voice registers and pitch. He learned about the different types of opera voices. His voice, he discovered, was a tenor, which meant he could sing high notes. Ricardo practiced in his small apartment. He lived alone in a tiny studio with thin walls. He was always worried about bothering his neighbors, so he practiced quietly during the day and only let his voice out fully when he was at the theater late at night, after he made sure everyone was truly gone. At first his voice sounded rough and untrained. He cracked on high notes. His breathing was not right. But Ricardo did not give up. He kept practicing. He kept learning. Slowly, month by month, year by year, his voice improved. He watched free videos on the internet, videos of famous singers giving lessons. He studied their mouth positions, their posture, the way they breathed. He practiced scales while he mopped floors. He practiced breathing exercises while he emptied trash cans. The other janitors thought he was a bit strange. During lunch breaks, while they talked about sports and television shows, Ricardo would sit quietly in the corner reading books about opera. He had a worn notebook where he wrote down Italian words and their pronunciations. He made notes about different singing techniques he wanted to try. "Why do you care so much about that fancy music?" his co-worker James asked him once. James was a large man who had worked at the center for 15 years. "That stuff is for rich people. It is not for people like us." Ricardo had just smiled and shrugged. How could he explain? How could he make James understand that opera was not just for rich people? It was for anyone who loved beauty, anyone who wanted to feel something deep in their soul. His grandmother had been poor, but opera had made her life richer. "I just like it," Ricardo had said simply. The years passed. Ricardo turned 30, then 32, then 35. He kept cleaning, kept practicing, kept learning. His voice grew stronger and more beautiful. When he sang in the empty theater at night, the sound was pure and clear. But no one knew. No one heard him except the empty seats and the silent walls. Sometimes Ricardo felt discouraged. What was the point of all this practice? He was not getting any younger. He had no formal training. He had no connections in the music world. He was just a janitor with an impossible dream. But then he would remember his grandmother. He would remember her face when she listened to those old records. He would remember her saying, "Maybe one day you will sing in places like that." And he would keep going. One day something new appeared on the bulletin board in the staff break room. Ricardo was getting his lunch from the refrigerator when he saw it. It was a bright yellow flyer with bold letters. "Annual Staff Talent Showcase," it announced. "Show your hidden talents. Open to all Riverside Performing Arts Center employees. Singers, dancers, comedians, musicians, everyone welcome. Sign up at the front desk by Friday." Ricardo stood there staring at the flyer. His heart started beating faster. His hands felt sweaty. Could he do this? Could he actually perform in front of people? "You should sign up, Ricardo," a voice said behind him. It was Maria, one of the other cleaning staff. She was a kind woman who always smiled at him. "I know you love music. I have heard you humming while you work." Ricardo turned to look at her. "I do not know," he said quietly. "I am not good enough." "How do you know if you do not try?" Maria said, patting his shoulder. "What is the worst that can happen?" "It is just for fun. Just co-workers. No pressure." James walked in and saw them looking at the flyer. "Oh no, not that thing again," he groaned. "Every year they do this. It is always awkward. Last year, someone from accounting did a terrible magic act. The year before, someone sang karaoke off-key. It is painful to watch." "Come on, James," Maria said. "Some acts are good. Remember when Lisa from the box office played piano? That was beautiful." "Yeah, 1 out of 20 acts," James muttered, opening his lunch bag. After they left, Ricardo kept staring at the flyer. His mind was racing. This could be his chance. His chance to finally share his voice with someone. His chance to step out from behind his cleaning cart and show people who he really was. But fear gripped him. What if they laughed? What if he forgot the words? What if his voice cracked? What if people thought he was foolish for trying to sing opera when he was just a janitor? For 2 days, Ricardo thought about it constantly. He barely slept. He cleaned on autopilot, his mind somewhere else. Finally, on Thursday evening, he made his decision. His hands were shaking as he walked to the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman named Katie, smiled at him. "Can I help you?" she asked. "The talent show," Ricardo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to sign up." "Oh, wonderful," Katie said, pulling out a form. "Name? Ricardo Morales. And what will you be performing?" Ricardo hesitated. "Singing," he said. "Vocal performance. Great. Any specific song you want us to know about?" "We need to know if you need any special equipment." "I will need a music track," Ricardo said. "I can bring it on my phone. I just need something to play it through the speakers." "No problem, we can do that," Katie said, writing it down. "Anything else?" Ricardo shook his head. Katie smiled and handed him a copy of the form. "You are all set. The showcase is 2 weeks from Saturday at 2 p.m. in the small auditorium. Be there by 1:30 p.m. for sound check. Good luck." Ricardo took the form with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. As he walked away, he felt his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. He had done it. He had actually signed up. There was no turning back now. That night, Ricardo stood alone in the empty main theater. He had just finished his cleaning, but he did not leave right away. He stood on the stage, looking out at all the empty seats. In 2 weeks, some of those seats would be filled with his coworkers. They would all be looking at him. "I can do this," he said out loud to the empty room. His voice echoed back to him. "I have to do this. For grandmother. For myself." He took a deep breath and began to sing. His voice rose up into the darkness, strong and true. He sang the aria he had been practicing for months, the one he planned to perform at the showcase. He sang with everything he had, pouring all his love and all his dreams into every note. When he finished, the silence felt heavy. Ricardo stood there on the stage, breathing hard, his eyes closed. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about all the years of secret practice. He thought about the little boy who had sat on the floor listening to scratchy old records and dreaming impossible dreams. In 2 weeks, that dream would either come true or be crushed forever. Ricardo opened his eyes and looked out at the empty theater one more time. Then he turned off the lights and went home to practice some more. He had 2 weeks to prepare for the most important performance of his life. The 2 weeks passed both too quickly and too slowly for Ricardo. Every day felt like an eternity, but somehow the days also flew by like hours. He practiced every chance he got. In his apartment, he sang quietly, always worried about disturbing his neighbors. At work, after everyone left, he sang with full voice in the empty theater. He must have sung his chosen aria 100 times. It was from an opera called La Traviata. The piece was challenging, with high notes that required perfect control. But Ricardo loved it. The song spoke of love and longing, emotions he understood deeply. Every word, even though they were in Italian, felt like they came from his own heart. At work, Ricardo tried to act normal. He pushed his cleaning cart through the hallways. He mopped floors. He emptied trash cans. But his mind was always somewhere else. Always thinking about the showcase, always feeling a mix of excitement and terror. Maria noticed the change in him. "You are nervous," she said one day during their lunch break. "About the talent show?" Ricardo nodded. He was eating a simple sandwich, but he barely tasted it. His stomach felt tight with anxiety. "What are you going to sing?" Maria asked. "Opera," Ricardo said quietly. "An Italian opera." Maria's eyebrows went up in surprise. "Really, opera? I did not know you could sing opera." "I practice," Ricardo said. "I have been practicing for years." "Years?" Maria looked impressed. "Then you must be good. I cannot wait to hear you." Her kindness made Ricardo feel a little better. But when James walked in, the anxiety came rushing back. "Still doing that talent show thing?" James asked, overhearing them. "Man, I would never have the guts. Standing up there in front of everyone. What if people laugh?" "James!" Maria scolded him. "Do not say things like that. You will make him more nervous." "I am just being honest," James said, biting into his apple. "People are going to judge." "That is what happens at these things." Ricardo said nothing. James was right, of course. People would judge. That was exactly what Ricardo was afraid of. He was a janitor, a cleaner. Would people take him seriously? Or would they laugh before he even started singing? That night, alone in the theater, Ricardo's practice did not go well. He was too tense, too worried. His high notes came out strained. He forgot some of the Italian words. He had to stop and start over 3 times. "No, no, no," he said to himself, frustrated. "This is not good enough." He tried again, but it was worse. His voice cracked on a note that he usually hit perfectly. Ricardo sat down on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he was not ready. Maybe he would never be ready. He thought about withdrawing from the showcase. He could just tell Katie at the front desk that he was sick, that he could not perform. No one would be surprised. No one really expected anything from him anyway. But then he thought about his grandmother. He imagined her sitting in the audience wearing her Sunday best dress, the one she saved for special occasions. He imagined her face when she heard him sing. She would be so proud. Ricardo stood up. "One more time," he said out loud. "For her." He took several deep breaths, the way he had learned from his books and videos. He relaxed his shoulders. He imagined the tension flowing out of his body. Then he began to sing again. This time it was better. His voice was clear and strong. The notes flowed smoothly. The Italian words came naturally. When he hit the difficult high note near the end, it rang out pure and beautiful, echoing through the empty theater. Ricardo smiled. He could do this. He just needed to believe in himself. The days continued to pass. Ricardo kept practicing, but he also tried to rest his voice. He drank a lot of water. He avoided foods that might hurt his throat. He made sure to get enough sleep, even though anxiety sometimes kept him awake at night. At the staff areas of the theater, people talked about the upcoming showcase. Word had spread about who was performing what. The woman from the marketing department was going to do stand-up comedy. 2 guys from the technical crew were performing a dance routine. The assistant manager was playing guitar. When people asked Ricardo what he was doing, he kept his answers vague. "Just singing," he would say. He did not mention that it was opera. He was afraid that if he told them, they might laugh even before the show. The Friday before the showcase, Ricardo went to the library. He wanted to print out a nice copy of the Italian lyrics just in case he needed a reference. While he was there, he stopped by the music section and looked at books about famous opera singers. There was one book about Luciano Pavarotti. one of the greatest tenors who ever lived. Ricardo opened it and read about Pavarotti's life. He learned that Pavarotti had once been rejected from music school. He learned that even Pavarotti had been nervous before performances, even after he became famous. Even the great ones were scared, Ricardo whispered to himself. This made him feel a little better. Saturday morning arrived, the day of the showcase. Ricardo woke up very early, even though he had not worked the night before. He had asked for the night off so he could rest before his performance. His supervisor had been surprised. Ricardo never asked for time off. But Mr. Chen had agreed. Ricardo could not eat breakfast. His stomach was too nervous. He drank some warm tea with honey, which was supposed to be good for the voice. He did his vocal warm-ups carefully, quietly, so he would not bother his neighbors. He showered and then stood in front of his closet, trying to decide what to wear. He did not own any fancy clothes. He had his work uniform, some regular shirts and pants for his days off, and one old suit that he wore to church a few times a year. Should he wear the suit, or should he wear his janitor uniform? Ricardo thought about it for a long time. Part of him wanted to wear the suit, to look more professional, more like a real performer. But another part of him felt that wearing his uniform was important. It showed who he was. It showed where he came from. He was not ashamed of being a janitor. This was honest work. In the end, Ricardo decided to wear his uniform. It was clean and pressed. He polished his work shoes until they shined. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he looked exactly like what he was, a working man with a dream. Ricardo arrived at the Riverside Performing Arts Center at 1:15 p.m. He was early, but he wanted to make sure everything was ready. The showcase was being held in the small auditorium, which was different from the main theater. It was smaller and simpler, but it still had a real stage and about 200 seats. When Ricardo walked in, several performers were already there. The activities coordinator, a cheerful woman named Sandra, was organizing everything. She had a clipboard and was checking off names. "Ricardo," she called out when she saw him. "Good, you are here. You are number 7 on the list. We will do a quick sound check with everyone, and then we start at 2 p.m. sharp. Did you bring your music?" Ricardo nodded and pulled out his phone. "It is on here," he said. "Perfect. Give it to Tom over there." She pointed to a young man near the sound equipment. "He will make sure it is ready to play." Ricardo walked over to Tom and handed him the phone. Tom looked to be in his early 20s, probably a college student working part-time. "What are you performing?" Tom asked, taking the phone. "Singing," Ricardo said. "Opera." Tom's face showed surprise. "Really, opera? That is different." "Cool, man. Which track is it?" Ricardo showed him. Tom plugged the phone into the sound system and played a few seconds to test it. The orchestral music filled the room, rich and dramatic. Several people turned to look. "Great quality," Tom said. "This will sound amazing through our speakers. You are all set." Ricardo thanked him and found a seat near the back of the auditorium. More performers and audience members were arriving now. He saw Maria come in with several other members of the cleaning staff. She spotted him and waved enthusiastically. Ricardo waved back, managing a small smile. James was there too, sitting with some of the maintenance crew. He saw Ricardo and gave a thumbs up. Despite his earlier discouraging words, James had come to watch. That meant something. Ricardo's supervisor, Mr. Chen, arrived and sat in the middle section. He looked a bit uncomfortable, like he was not used to attending social events. But he had come, and he nodded at Ricardo when their eyes met. More people kept coming in. Ricardo recognized faces from all over the theater. There was Katie from the front desk. There were the ushers who worked during shows. There were people from the administrative offices upstairs, people whose names Ricardo did not even know. And then Ricardo saw someone who made his heart skip a beat. It was Dr. Helen Foster, the artistic director of the entire Riverside Performing Arts Center. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, always perfectly dressed, always walking with confidence. She made all the big decisions about which operas and performances the theater would host. Dr. Foster rarely attended staff events. What was she doing here? "Ladies and gentlemen," Sandra called out, standing on the stage. "Thank you all for coming to our annual Staff Talent Showcase. We have 12 wonderful acts today. Please be respectful to all performers. Remember, this is all in good fun. Let us give everyone our support and encouragement." The audience applauded. Ricardo's hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants. The show began. The first performer was a woman from accounting who did a magic act. She made a coin disappear and reappear, did some card tricks, and made everyone laugh when one trick went wrong and the cards spilled everywhere. The audience clapped warmly. Next was a man from the box office who played the piano. He performed a classical piece, his fingers moving skillfully over the keys. The audience seemed impressed. The performances continued. There was a comedy sketch performed by two people from marketing. There were three singers who sang popular songs using karaoke-style backing tracks. There was a young woman who did a ballet dance. There was a man who performed a scene from a Shakespeare play. Some acts were very good. Others were less polished but still entertaining. The audience was kind to everyone, clapping and cheering after each performance. Ricardo watched it all, barely breathing. His own heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands would not stop shaking. He kept running through the Italian lyrics in his head, terrified he might forget them. "Our next performer," Sandra announced, "is Ricardo Morales from our maintenance staff. Ricardo will be doing a vocal performance for us." This was it. This was the moment. Ricardo stood up on legs that felt weak. He walked down the aisle toward the stage. It felt like the longest walk of his life. He was very aware of every eye on him. He heard whispers, could feel people looking at his janitor uniform. He climbed the steps onto the stage. The lights were bright, much brighter than he had expected. He could not see the audience clearly anymore. They were just shadows beyond the light. Sandra handed him the microphone. "Good luck," she whispered with an encouraging smile. Ricardo stood at center stage. He looked out at the blurry shapes of the audience. His mouth was dry. His heart was racing. For a terrible moment, he thought he might faint. He heard some whispers from the audience. Then he heard something else. A small laugh. Then another. People were not laughing at a joke. They were laughing at him, at the janitor in his work uniform standing on stage about to sing. The laughter was not mean exactly. It was more like surprise, like people found the situation amusing. But to Ricardo, each laugh felt like a small knife in his heart. In the audience, James shifted uncomfortably. He felt bad now about all the discouraging things he had said. Maria looked angry at the people who were laughing. She wanted to tell them to be quiet, to give Ricardo a chance. Dr. Foster, the artistic director, sat with her arms crossed, her face neutral. She was probably wondering why she had decided to attend this year's showcase. Ricardo closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about all the nights he had practiced alone in the empty theater. He thought about the 7 years he had been invisible, cleaning up after others, never complaining, always dreaming. He opened his eyes. "This is for you, grandmother," he whispered, too quietly for the microphone to pick up. He gave a small nod to Tom at the sound booth. The music started. The opening notes of the orchestral track filled the auditorium. It was dramatic and sweeping, the sound of a full orchestra. The whispering in the audience got a little louder. Some people were pulling out their phones, probably expecting to record something funny to share later. Ricardo lifted the microphone. The moment had come. His entire life had led to this single moment. He took a deep breath, the way he had practiced thousands of times. He felt the air fill his lungs. He felt his diaphragm expand. He positioned his mouth exactly right. And then Ricardo Morales began to sing. The first note came out of him like a miracle. It was a powerful, pure tenor note that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. The note filled the entire auditorium, clear and strong and absolutely beautiful. The effect on the audience was instant. The whispering stopped. The laughter died completely. People who had been looking at their phones lowered them slowly. Every eye fixed on the stage. Ricardo continued singing. The Italian words flowed from him perfectly, each syllable clear and precise. His voice rose and fell with the music, hitting every note with stunning accuracy. When he reached the high notes, notes that even trained singers found challenging, his voice soared effortlessly, filling every corner of the room with sound. In the audience, Maria's mouth had dropped open. Tears had already started forming in her eyes. She could not believe what she was hearing. This was Ricardo, the quiet janitor who pushed a cleaning cart? This was the same man? James sat frozen in his seat, his eyes wide. He felt ashamed of every doubting word he had ever said. This was not just good. This was extraordinary. Mr. Chen, the supervisor, leaned forward in his seat, completely forgetting to maintain his usual stern expression. He looked amazed, proud, and shocked all at once. Katie from the front desk had her hand over her mouth, her eyes shining. She was one of the few people who had always been kind to Ricardo, and now she understood there was so much more to him than anyone had known. And Dr. Helen Foster, the artistic director, had sat up very straight in her seat. Her arms were no longer crossed. She was leaning forward, her trained ear catching every nuance of Ricardo's voice. Her expression had changed from polite boredom to intense focus. She knew voices. She had heard thousands of singers in her career, and what she was hearing now was remarkable. Ricardo was not thinking about any of them. He was lost in the music and the emotion of the piece. He was singing about love and loss, about dreams and longing. Every word meant something to him. This was not just a performance. This was his soul made audible. The song built to its climax. Ricardo's voice rose higher and higher, demonstrating control that took years to develop. His final high note seemed to hang in the air, pure and crystalline, holding for what seemed like an impossible length of time. Then the music ended. Ricardo held his pose for just a moment, the way he had seen professional singers do in videos. Then he lowered the microphone and simply stood there waiting. The silence that followed felt eternal. It lasted only seconds, but to Ricardo it felt like hours. In that silence, he had time to think. Did I do well? Did they understand? Or did I just make a fool of myself? Then the auditorium exploded with sound. The applause hit Ricardo like a physical wave. It was not polite clapping. It was not the kind of applause people give just to be nice. This was real, genuine, thunderous applause. It filled the auditorium and seemed to shake the very walls. People were not just clapping. They were standing up. One person stood, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet. A standing ovation for him, for Ricardo Morales, the janitor. Ricardo stood on the stage, completely overwhelmed. The bright lights made it hard to see faces clearly, but he could see the shapes of people standing, their hands raised and clapping. He could hear shouts of bravo. Some people were whistling. He did not know what to do. His eyes filled with tears and he tried to blink them away. Professional singers knew how to handle this moment with grace, but Ricardo had never imagined it would actually happen to him. He managed a small bow, the way he had seen opera singers do at the end of performances. The applause continued. It did not stop. If anything, it got louder. In the audience, Maria was crying openly now, not even trying to hide her tears. She clapped until her hands hurt. She was so proud, so happy for her quiet friend who had just shown everyone what he could do. James was clapping hard too, shaking his head in disbelief. Unbelievable, he kept saying to the person next to him. That was unbelievable. I had no idea. 7 years working together and I had no idea. Mr. Chen was clapping with a huge smile on his usually serious face. He felt proud, like a father watching his son succeed. He had supervised Ricardo for 7 years, always appreciating his good work ethic, but never suspecting this hidden talent. Katie was jumping up and down while clapping, her young enthusiasm bubbling over. "Oh my God," she shouted to anyone who would listen. That was amazing. And Dr. Helen Foster, the artistic director, was applauding with a look of absolute astonishment on her elegant face. Her trained mind was already racing. Where had this voice come from? How had such talent been hiding in her building all this time? What could be done with a voice like that? Sandra, the activities coordinator, finally climbed onto the stage. She had to gesture for the audience to quiet down. It took almost a full minute before the applause began to fade. "Ricardo Morales, everyone," Sandra announced, her own voice filled with emotion. That was absolutely incredible. Another wave of applause erupted. Ricardo bowed again, his face red, his eyes still shiny with unshed tears. He handed the microphone back to Sandra with shaking hands and walked off the stage. But he did not get far. As soon as he came down the steps, people surrounded him. It seemed like everyone wanted to talk to him at once. "Ricardo, that was beautiful. Where did you learn to sing like that?" "I am speechless. Just speechless. You should be on a real stage." "I have chills." "Actual chills?" Ricardo tried to respond to everyone, but he could barely speak. His throat felt tight with emotion. He managed to say thank you over and over, but the words felt inadequate. Maria pushed through the crowd and grabbed him in a tight hug. "Ricardo," she sobbed. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. I am so proud of you." Ricardo hugged her back, and now his own tears started falling. All the years of secret practice, all the lonely nights singing to empty seats, all the doubt and fear, it all came pouring out in those tears. James appeared next, looking sheepish. "Man, I am sorry," he said, gripping Ricardo's shoulder. "I am sorry for all the negative stuff I said. I was so wrong. You are incredible. Really incredible." "It is okay," Ricardo managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." Mr. Chen waited his turn, then shook Ricardo's hand firmly. "I am very proud, Ricardo," he said. "Very proud. You have a special gift." The other performers congratulated him too. The woman who had done the magic act, the man who had played piano, the singers who had performed before him. They all seemed genuinely happy for him, though some looked a bit stunned that they had been completely upstaged by the janitor. The showcase continued. There were still 5 more acts to go, but everyone knew that nothing else that day would match what they had just witnessed. Ricardo tried to watch the other performances, tried to pay attention and give them his respect, but his mind was spinning. He could barely process what had just happened. When the showcase finally ended, the crowd surrounded Ricardo again. But this time, someone else was pushing through the people. "Someone important." "Excuse me, pardon me," a cultured voice said. "May I speak with Mr. Morales, please?" The crowd parted, and there stood Dr. Helen Foster, the artistic director. She was looking directly at Ricardo with an expression of intense interest. Ricardo's heart, which had finally started to slow down, began racing again. Dr. Foster had never spoken to him before. He had seen her many times, of course, but always from a distance. She existed in a different world from his. "Mr. Morales," she said, extending her hand. "I am Helen Foster, the artistic director here." That was an extraordinary performance. Ricardo shook her hand, his own hand still trembling. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Where did you train?" she asked directly. "Which conservatory? Who was your teacher?" Ricardo looked down at his shoes. This was the moment he had feared. The moment when someone important would ask about his training and he would have to admit he had none. "I did not train anywhere," he said softly. "I taught myself. Books, videos, practice. Just practice." Dr. Foster's eyes widened. "You are self-taught? Completely self-taught?" Ricardo nodded, still not meeting her eyes. He waited for her to lose interest, to dismiss him. Self-taught singers were not taken seriously in the opera world. Everyone knew that, but Dr. Foster did not dismiss him. Instead, she looked even more amazed. "That is remarkable," she said. "More than remarkable. It is extraordinary. Do you have any idea how rare that is? To develop that level of technique without formal instruction?" Ricardo looked up at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "How long have you been working here?" Dr. Foster asked. 7 years, ma'am. 7 years. Dr. Foster shook her head slowly. "All this time, this voice has been in my building, and I did not know." "What a waste. What a terrible waste." She paused, thinking. Ricardo waited, his heart pounding. "Mr. Morales, I want you to do something for me," Dr. Foster said. "I want you to come to my office Monday morning." "Can you do that?" "I work Monday nights, but I can come in the morning," Ricardo said. "What time?" 10 o'clock. "Do you know where my office is?" "Yes, ma'am. 3rd floor." "Good, we need to talk about your future." Dr. Foster smiled at him, a real warm smile. "This voice cannot be wasted cleaning floors. No offense to your current work, which I am sure you do very well, but this voice needs to be heard by the world." She squeezed his hand once more and then moved away through the crowd. Ricardo stood there, feeling like he was in a dream. Had that really just happened? Had the artistic director really just asked to meet with him? The rest of that day passed in a blur. More people congratulated Ricardo. Sandra made him pose for photos. Someone recorded a video of him talking about how he learned to sing. Katie got his phone number so the marketing department could contact him. By the time Ricardo finally left the building that evening, he was exhausted. His feet carried him home automatically while his mind replayed every moment of the day over and over. The fear before going on stage, the laughter from some people in the audience, the moment when he opened his mouth and let his voice out, the standing ovation, Dr. Foster's words. In his small apartment, Ricardo sat on his bed and just stared at the wall for a long time. He felt like a different person than the one who had woken up that morning. Everything had changed. In just a few minutes on stage, his entire life had shifted. He thought about calling someone, sharing the news with someone. But who? He had lost touch with most of his relatives over the years. His uncle would not understand or care. His neighbors were strangers. The only people who had witnessed it were the people at the theater, and they had been there. Ricardo looked at the small table in the corner of his room. On it sat an old framed photograph of his grandmother. He walked over and picked it up gently. In the photo, she was younger than he remembered her, smiling at the camera. "I did it, abuela," he whispered to the photograph. I sang for everyone, and they listened. They really listened." He held the frame close to his chest and let himself cry. These were not sad tears. They were tears of relief, of joy, of years of loneliness finally ending. He cried until he had no tears left, then carefully put the photograph back on the table. That night, Ricardo did not go to work. He had the night off and he used it to rest. But he could not sleep. His mind would not stop racing. What would Dr. Foster say to him on Monday? What did she mean about his future? Was this real? Could his life actually be about to change? Sunday passed slowly. Ricardo went to church as he usually did. He said prayers of thanks. He lit a candle for his grandmother. Then he went home and tried to stay calm, but his anxiety and excitement made it impossible. He practiced his singing, wanting to stay sharp for whatever might come next. But he was careful not to strain his voice. He had learned that voices needed rest too, especially after an emotional performance like yesterday's. That evening, Ricardo got a phone call from an unknown number. He almost did not answer, thinking it might be a spam call, but something made him pick up. Yeah, and dude, it is blowing up. It has like 50,000 views already, and it has only been 24 hours. People are sharing it everywhere. Comments are crazy. Everyone wants to know who you are and where they can hear more. Ricardo sat down heavily on his bed. 50,000 people? And growing. Every time I refresh, there are more views. You are going viral, Ricardo. This is huge. After Tom hung up, Ricardo sat in stunned silence. 50,000 people. He tried to imagine that many people. That was more than 50 times the audience at yesterday's showcase. And they had all heard him sing. The thought was terrifying and thrilling at the same time. He did not have social media himself. He had never seen the point. But now, apparently, he was on it anyway. 50,000 strangers had heard his voice. What did they think? Did they really like it? Or were they making fun of him? Ricardo did not sleep well that night. His dreams were confused and anxious. He dreamed of singing on huge stages in front of thousands of people. He dreamed of forgetting the words. He dreamed of his grandmother sitting in the audience smiling. Monday morning finally arrived. Ricardo woke up very early, even though his meeting with Dr. Foster was not until 10 o'clock. He showered twice, wanting to be perfectly clean. He put on his one suit, the one he wore to church. It was not expensive or stylish, but it was clean and neat. He arrived at the Riverside Performing Arts Center at 9:45 a.m. This was unusual for him. Normally, he only saw the building at night when it was quiet and empty. Now in the morning light, it bustled with activity. Office workers hurried through the hallways with coffee cups and folders. Phone rang in distant offices. The building was alive with daylight energy. Ricardo took the stairs to the 3rd floor. He had cleaned these stairs many times, but he had never climbed them to go to the administrative offices. That was a different world, a world where important people made important decisions. He found Dr. Foster's office. The door had a nameplate that read, Dr. Helen Foster, Artistic Director, in elegant letters. Ricardo took a deep breath and knocked.
"Come in,"
her voice called. Ricardo opened the door. Dr. Foster's office was beautiful. Large windows let in lots of natural light. The walls were covered with framed posters from past opera productions. Shelves held books about music and theater. A large desk dominated the room, but Dr. Foster was not sitting behind it. She was sitting in one of the comfortable chairs near the window, and she gestured for Ricardo to take the other chair. "Ricardo, thank you for coming," she said warmly. "Please sit. Would you like some coffee or water?" "Water, please, if it is not too much trouble." Dr. Foster poured him a glass of water from a pitcher on her desk. Then she sat back down and looked at him seriously. "Ricardo, I'm going to be very direct with you," she said. "I have been thinking about you all weekend. I have been in this business for 30 years. I have heard thousands of voices. And what I heard on Saturday was special. Truly special." Ricardo gripped his water glass, saying nothing. "Your technique is rough in places," Dr. Foster continued. "That is to be expected from someone self-taught. But your natural instrument, your actual voice, is remarkable. And your musicality, your emotional connection to the music that cannot be taught. You either have it or you do not. And you have it. Thank you, ma'am, Ricardo whispered. But here is the problem, Dr. Foster said. You are 35 years old. In the opera world, that is late. Most professional singers start serious training in their teens or early 20s. You have lost time. Ricardo's heart sank. Here it came. The rejection. It was too late for him. He had known it all along. However, Dr. Foster said, and Ricardo looked up hopefully, late does not mean impossible. There have been singers who started later and still built successful careers. It will be harder for you. You will have to work twice as hard as someone younger. But I think you can do it. If you want it badly enough. I want it, Ricardo said immediately. I have wanted it my whole life. Dr. Foster smiled. I thought you would say that. So here is what I propose. We have a vocal coach who works with our Young Artist program. His name is Professor Marcus Chen. He is one of the best in the country. I spoke with him yesterday, described your voice, and he has agreed to hear you sing. Really? Ricardo could barely breathe. I want you to audition for him this week. If he agrees that you have potential, and I think he will, I want to arrange for you to study with him. Now I must be honest. His normal fee is very expensive. Far beyond what you could afford on a janitor's salary. Ricardo's hope deflated again. Of course, everything came down to money. Dreams always did. But, Dr. Foster continued, I have spoken with our board of directors. We have a scholarship fund for promising young artists. I think we can make an argument that you qualify despite your age. The scholarship would cover Professor Chen's fees. Ricardo stared at her. A scholarship for me? Yes, but here is the challenge. You would need to dedicate significant time to your training. At least 20 hours a week, probably more. You cannot do that while working full-time night shifts as a janitor. I can quit, Ricardo said immediately. I can find a day job somewhere else, something part-time, and train at night. Dr. Foster shook her head. I have a better idea. We need someone to help in our archives during the day. It is part-time, 20 hours a week, and it pays a bit more than your current job. The hours are flexible, so you can arrange them around your training. Would that interest you? Ricardo could not speak. He could only nod. This was too much, too good. It could not be real. There is one more thing, Dr. Foster said. That video of you singing, it has gone viral. As of this morning, it has over 200,000 views. The press has started calling. The local news wants to interview you. This could be very good for you and for the theater, but it also means pressure. Are you ready for that? 200,000 views. Ricardo's head spun. I do not know, he admitted. I just wanted to sing. I did not expect any of this. I know, Dr. Foster said gently. And that is part of your charm, actually. You are genuine. People respond to that. But you need to be prepared. Your life is about to change significantly. The question is, are you ready to change with it? Ricardo thought about his small apartment, his quiet life, his simple routine of work and secret practice. All of that would be gone. His life would become complicated and uncertain. There would be challenges he could not even imagine yet. But there would also be music. Real music. The chance to truly become what he had always dreamed of being. He looked at Dr. Foster and said the only thing he could say, yes, I am ready. The next few days moved so fast that Ricardo barely had time to think. Everything in his life was changing, and he felt like he was riding a wave that he could not control. He could only hold on and hope he would not fall off. On Tuesday, Ricardo had his audition with Professor Marcus Chen. He was nervous, more nervous than he had been for the talent showcase. This time he was singing for someone who really knew opera, someone who had trained professional singers for decades. What if Professor Chen thought he was not good enough? What if the scholarship was withdrawn? Professor Chen's studio was in a building near the university. It was a small room with excellent acoustics, a piano, and walls covered in photographs of famous singers. Some of those singers had studied with Professor Chen. Their signed photos thanked him for his guidance. Professor Chen himself was a small, thin man in his 60s, with sharp eyes and gray hair. He did not smile when Ricardo entered. He simply nodded and gestured to the center of the room. Stand there, he said. Posture straight. Shoulders back but relaxed. Show me what you can do. Ricardo sang the same aria he had performed at the showcase. Professor Chen sat at the piano, his face showing nothing. When Ricardo finished, there was a long silence. Again, Professor Chen said, "This time I will stop you when I hear something wrong." "And I will hear many things wrong," Ricardo sang again. Professor Chen stopped him every few lines. "Your breath support is collapsing here again," Ricardo sang. "You are tensing your jaw on the high notes again," Ricardo sang. "Good tone, but you are pushing too hard. Let the sound come naturally." Again. They worked for over an hour. It was exhausting. By the end, Ricardo's throat was tired and his confidence was shaken. Professor Chen had criticized almost everything about his technique. But then, as Ricardo was preparing to leave, Professor Chen spoke. "You have significant technical problems," he said bluntly. "Your training will be difficult. You have developed some bad habits that we will need to break." Ricardo nodded, his heart sinking. "However," Professor Chen continued, "your natural instrument is very fine, and your musical instincts are excellent. Most importantly, you have passion. Real passion. That cannot be taught." He paused. "I will accept you as a student. We will train 4 days a week, 2 hours each session. You will also need to practice daily on your own. But I will give you strict guidelines. If you follow my instructions exactly, we can develop your voice properly." Ricardo felt like crying with relief. "Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much." "Do not thank me yet," Professor Chen said with a slight smile. "You will hate me sometimes. I am not an easy teacher. But if you work hard, we will make something of that voice." The scholarship was approved. Ricardo's new job in the archives started the following Monday. His schedule became carefully organized. He worked in the archives from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. 4 days a week. He trained with Professor Chen from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on those same days. The other days were for personal practice, studying music theory and learning new pieces. The archives job was different from cleaning. Ricardo worked in the basement of the theater, in a climate-controlled room filled with old programs, photographs, posters, and recordings from decades of performances. His job was to digitize these materials, to scan and catalog everything so it would be preserved for the future. It was quiet work, and Ricardo enjoyed it. He liked looking at the old programs, reading about performances from 50 or 60 years ago. He liked seeing the names of singers who had graced the stage, some of whom later became famous. He wondered if someday his name might be in a program that someone would look at and remember. But the biggest change in Ricardo's life was the sudden fame. The video of him singing had continued to spread online. It had been shared by several popular social media accounts. News outlets picked up the story. "Janitor's hidden opera talent goes viral," read one headline. "From cleaning floors to hitting high notes," said another. Within a week of the showcase, a local television news crew came to interview Ricardo. They filmed him in the theater, standing on the stage where he had once cleaned late at night. They interviewed Dr. Foster, who spoke about discovering hidden talent. They interviewed Professor Chen, who said Ricardo had the potential for a professional career. The segment aired on the evening news. Ricardo watched it on his laptop in his apartment, feeling strange seeing himself on screen. The video made everything look easy and perfect, like a fairy tale. It did not show the years of lonely practice, the doubts, the fear. But Ricardo supposed that was how stories were told. People wanted inspiration. They wanted to believe that dreams could come true. After the news segment aired, things got even more intense. Ricardo received messages from people all over the country. Some were other aspiring singers asking for advice. Some were people who just wanted to say his story had inspired them. Some were from reporters requesting more interviews. One message came from a man named David Liu, who worked for a streaming service that produced documentary content. David wanted to film Ricardo's journey as he trained and prepared for his first real performance. "People love underdog stories," David explained when they met for coffee. "They want to see the struggle, the hard work, the transformation. Your story has all of that." Ricardo was not sure about being filmed all the time. It felt invasive, but Dr. Foster encouraged him to consider it. "This kind of exposure could be very valuable for your career," she said. And honestly, the theater could use the positive publicity too. So Ricardo agreed. A small film crew began following him occasionally. They filmed him working in the archives. They filmed his lessons with Professor Chen, who grumbled about having cameras in his studio but allowed it. They filmed Ricardo practicing in his apartment, his small space looking even smaller on camera. The training with Professor Chen was harder than anything Ricardo had ever done. The professor was strict and demanding. He made Ricardo repeat simple exercises hundreds of times until they were perfect. He changed almost everything about the way Ricardo sang. "You have been using your throat too much, forcing the sound," Professor Chen explained. "Opera singing is about breath support and resonance, not pushing. The sound should feel effortless even when you are singing the most difficult passages." It did not feel effortless to Ricardo. It felt impossible. Some days after a training session, he would go home feeling frustrated and discouraged. His voice seemed to be getting worse, not better. The techniques Professor Chen taught him felt unnatural and awkward. "This is normal," Professor Chen assured him. "You are breaking old habits and building new ones. It always gets worse before it gets better. Trust the process." Ricardo tried to trust, but it was hard. He missed the easy confidence he had felt when singing his old way. Now everything was difficult and technical. He had to think about his breath, his posture, his jaw, his soft palate, his diaphragm, the placement of the sound. How could anyone remember all of this and still make beautiful music? 3 months passed. Ricardo's new life had become routine. He worked in the archives, trained with Professor Chen, practiced at home, and occasionally dealt with interview requests and the documentary film crew. His bank account looked healthier than it ever had, despite the job paying less per hour than his old position. He was working fewer hours, but the pay was better and he had more energy. He saw his old coworkers sometimes. Maria always stopped to chat when she saw him in the building. She was proud of him and loved to tell everyone that she had known about his talent all along. James would give him a friendly nod. Even Mr. Chen, his old supervisor, seemed pleased with how things had turned out. But Ricardo also felt lonely sometimes. His life had changed so much that he no longer fit in with the maintenance crew. They were friendly, but there was distance now. Ricardo was not one of them anymore. Yet he was not really part of the professional opera world either. He was somewhere in between, belonging to neither group completely. One evening, Professor Chen made an announcement at the end of a training session. "I think you are ready," he said. "Ready for what?" Ricardo asked. "To perform." "Really perform? Not just at a staff talent show, but in front of a real audience as part of a real production?" Ricardo's heart started pounding. "You think so?" "I would not say it if I did not think so," Professor Chen said. "Your technique has improved dramatically. You still have work to do, but you are ready for small roles. Dr. Foster and I have been discussing this. The theater is producing a production of a well-known opera in 6 months. There is a small but significant role that would be perfect for you. It is not a leading role, but it is important. You would be on stage for 3 scenes. It would be your professional debut." Professional debut. The words hung in the air. This was real. This was actually happening. "What do I need to do?" Ricardo asked. "Audition formally," Professor Chen said. "Even though Dr. Foster and I both support you, the director of the production needs to hear you. There will be other people auditioning for the same role. You will have to earn it." The audition was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Ricardo practiced the audition piece obsessively. Professor Chen coached him carefully, focusing not just on the singing but on the performance aspects. In opera, it was not enough to sing well. You had to act to embody the character, to tell the story with your body and face as well as your voice. The day of the audition arrived. Ricardo stood backstage in the main theater, the same theater where he had once pushed his cleaning cart. But now he was here as a singer, waiting to audition for a role. 5 other men were auditioning for the same part. 3 of them were young, probably fresh out of music conservatories. The other 2 were older, experienced performers with impressive resumes. Ricardo was called forth. He walked onto the stage where the director, the music director, and several other important people sat in the audience. The stage lights were bright. The piano accompanist waited for his signal. This was different from the talent showcase. That had been friendly, supportive, almost playful. This was professional. These people did not care about his heartwarming story. They only cared about one thing. Could he do the job? Ricardo nodded to the accompanist and began to sing. He focused on everything Professor Chen had taught him. Support the breath. Keep the jaw relaxed. Place the tone in the mask. Think the pitch before singing it. But most importantly, forget all the technical thoughts and just feel the music. Live the character. He sang the audition piece all the way through. When he finished, he stood in silence waiting for a response. The director, a stern-looking woman named Patricia Alvarez, conferred with the music director in low voices. Then she looked up at Ricardo. "Thank you, Mr. Morales," she said. Her voice gave nothing away. "We will be in touch." That was it. Ricardo left the stage feeling uncertain. Had he done well? He could not tell. The other auditioners seemed so polished, so professional. Maybe Ricardo's technique was still too rough. Maybe the director thought he was not ready. 2 days later, Dr. Foster called Ricardo to her office. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor with his heart in his throat, preparing himself for disappointment. "Sit down, Ricardo," Dr. Foster said when he entered. She was smiling, which seemed like a good sign. "Director Alvarez called me this morning," Dr. Foster said. "She has made her decision about the casting." Ricardo held his breath. "You got the role," Dr. Foster said. "Congratulations, Ricardo. You are going to be in the production. You are officially a professional opera singer now." Ricardo sat there stunned. He had done it. He had actually done it. After all these years, after all the lonely nights of practice, after all the dreams that seemed impossible, he was going to sing opera on a professional stage. "There is more," Dr. Foster said. "The production opens in 6 months, but there is something before that. In 3 weeks, we are having a gala fundraiser. It is a major event with donors, patrons, and members of the press. We always have entertainment at the gala. Usually we invite guest artists to perform short pieces. This year I want you to perform." "Me?" Ricardo said, his voice cracking slightly. "At the gala?" "Yes. It will be excellent exposure for you and great publicity for the theater. The story of our janitor turned opera singer discovering his talent right here in this building. Our donors will love it, and it will be good experience for you before the full production." "How many people will be there?" Ricardo asked nervously. "About 500. 500 people." Ricardo had performed for 200 at the showcase. But 500? That was more than half the capacity of the main theater. "I know it is scary," Dr. Foster said kindly. "But you can do this, Ricardo. I believe in you. Professor Chen believes in you. Now you need to believe in yourself." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Professor Chen worked with Ricardo intensively on the piece he would perform at the gala. They focused on every detail, every phrase, every breath. The documentary crew filmed extensively, knowing this would be a crucial moment in Ricardo's story. Ricardo also had to deal with something he had never thought about before: what to wear. For the talent showcase, he had worn his janitor's uniform as a statement, but the gala was different. It was formal, elegant, a black tie event. He needed to look the part. Dr. Foster connected him with the theater's costume department. They fitted him for a proper tuxedo. When Ricardo saw himself in the mirror, dressed in the elegant black suit with a bow tie, he barely recognized himself. He looked like the opera singers he had seen in programs and videos. He looked professional. The night of the gala arrived. Ricardo stood backstage wearing his tuxedo, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone must be able to hear it. Through the curtain he could hear the sounds of the crowd. 500 people in their finest clothes, drinking champagne, talking and laughing. Wealthy patrons who donated large amounts of money to support the arts. Important people from the city. Press photographers, critics. What if he failed? What if his voice cracked? What if he forgot the words? This was not a friendly staff showcase where people would be kind no matter what. These people had high standards. They knew quality when they heard it. If he was not good enough, they would know. Maria had come to the gala. She had never attended one before, but Dr. Foster had arranged for several of Ricardo's friends from the theater staff to get tickets. Maria, James, Mr. Chen, Katie, and several others were out there somewhere in the audience. At least he would have some friendly faces watching. The first part of the gala was speeches and dinner. Ricardo waited backstage, too nervous to eat. Finally, after what felt like hours, it was time for the entertainment portion of the evening. Dr. Foster walked onto the stage to introduce him. Ricardo could hear her voice through the curtain, though he could not make out all the words. He heard phrases like "extraordinary story" and "discovered talent right here" and "the journey from janitor to opera singer." Then he heard his name. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ricardo Morales." The curtains opened. Ricardo walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely, the way audiences do when someone is being introduced. Ricardo could see them clearly. The theater was full. Every seat taken. 500 faces looking at him. He found Maria in the crowd. She was in the balcony section, waving enthusiastically. Next to her, James gave a thumbs up. Their encouragement helped calm his nerves slightly. Ricardo stood at center stage. The orchestra, a small ensemble for the gala, waited for his signal. This was it. This was the moment that would determine whether his dream could truly become reality. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs the way Professor Chen had taught him. He centered himself, feeling his feet solid on the stage floor. He thought of his grandmother, of her old records of Sunday afternoons listening to scratchy opera music in a tiny apartment. Then Ricardo began to sing. His voice, trained and refined by months of work with Professor Chen, flowed out of him pure and strong. The notes that had once been rough were now polished. The technique that had felt awkward was now natural. He was not just singing, he was performing. He was telling a story with his voice, sharing emotion with everyone in the theater. The audience, which had started out polite but reserved, began to lean forward in their seats. The usual chatter and rustling of a gala event stopped. People set down their champagne glasses. They stopped checking their phones. They simply listened. Ricardo sang with everything he had. Every note was for his grandmother. Every phrase was for the scared, hopeful boy who had dreamed impossible dreams. Every breath was for the man who had spent 7 years invisible, cleaning up after others while nursing a secret passion. When he reached the climax of the piece, his voice soaring on a long, difficult high note, the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. The note rang out, clear and powerful, filling every corner of the theater. And then the piece ended. Ricardo held his final pose, his eyes closed, his heart full. For one moment there was silence. Complete silence. Then the theater exploded with applause. The applause was different this time. It was not the enthusiastic, surprised reaction of co-workers discovering a hidden talent. This was the applause of people who knew opera, who understood music, who had heard thousands of performances, and they were applauding not out of kindness or sympathy, but because Ricardo had truly moved them. People were standing. Not just a few, but row after row rising to their feet. In the balcony, Maria was crying again, her hands clasped together in front of her heart. James was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring who saw. Mr. Chen was clapping with a huge smile on his face, but it was not just Ricardo's friends who were standing. The wealthy donors in their designer gowns and expensive suits were standing. The board members of the theater were standing. The music critics who had seen everything were standing. All 500 people were on their feet, filling the theater with the sound of their appreciation. Ricardo bowed, deeply and sincerely. He bowed again. The applause continued. Someone in the audience shouted, "Bravo!" and others joined in. "Bravo! Bravo!" The traditional shout of approval in opera houses around the world. Dr. Foster appeared on stage, her face glowing with pride. She took Ricardo's hand and raised it high, presenting him to the audience like a prize fighter who had just won a championship. The applause somehow grew even louder. When Ricardo finally left the stage, his legs were shaking. He had done it. He had performed for a real opera audience, and they had accepted him. They had approved of him. He was not just a janitor with a dream anymore. He was a real singer. Backstage, people crowded around him. Board members wanted to congratulate him. Donors wanted to take photos with him. A woman who introduced herself as a reviewer for the city's major newspaper asked if she could interview him tomorrow. A man from a classical music radio station wanted to record him for their program. Through all of this, Professor Chen stood off to the side, watching with a small, satisfied smile. When Ricardo finally made his way over to him, the professor nodded once. "You did well," Professor Chen said. Coming from him, these 3 simple words meant everything. Your breath control was excellent. The high notes were secure. Most importantly, you were not just singing. You were making music. You were telling a story. "Thank you, Professor," Ricardo said, his voice thick with emotion. "I could not have done this without you." "True," Professor Chen agreed without false modesty. "But I only refined what was already there. The gift was always yours, now come. We still have much work to do before your debut in the full production." The next morning, Ricardo woke up to find his phone filled with messages. The newspaper review had been published online overnight. He read it with trembling hands, almost afraid to see what it said. Last night at the Riverside Performing Arts Center Gala, the audience witnessed something remarkable. The review began. Ricardo Morales, whose journey from janitor to opera singer has already captured hearts online, proved that his viral fame was no fluke. His performance was technically accomplished and emotionally compelling. His tenor voice has a natural warmth and clarity that connects directly with the listener. While he still has room to grow as an artist, his debut suggests a promising future in opera. We will be watching his career with great interest. Ricardo read the review 3 times. A real critic, someone who reviewed professional opera singers, had written positive things about him. About Ricardo Morales, who less than a year ago had been emptying trash cans and mopping floors in the middle of the night. The documentary crew wanted to film his reaction to the review. They came to his apartment that afternoon. Ricardo felt self-conscious about letting them film his small, humble living space, but they insisted that it was important to show where he came from, to show that he had not forgotten his roots. How does it feel? David Liu, the documentary producer, asked. To go from cleaning the theater to performing on its stage? Ricardo thought about the question. It feels like a dream, he said honestly, but also like something that was always meant to happen. Like my whole life was leading to this moment even when I did not know it. What would you say to people who have dreams but think they are too old, or too late, or not educated enough to pursue them? David asked. Ricardo looked directly at the camera. I would say that it is never too late. I spent 7 years pushing a cleaning cart, thinking my dream was impossible. But I kept practicing anyway. I kept learning. And when the chance came, I was ready. So keep preparing even when it seems pointless. You never know when your moment will come. The weeks that followed were intense. Ricardo continued his training with Professor Chen, now focusing specifically on his role in the upcoming production. He had to learn not just his own part, but how it fit with the other singers, with the orchestra, with the staging. Opera was not just about standing and singing beautifully. It was about movement, about interacting with other performers, about being part of a larger story. He attended his first full cast rehearsal and felt intimidated. The other singers were all professionals with years of training and experience. They knew the unwritten rules of opera rehearsals. They understood the vocabulary that the director used. They could sight-read difficult music with ease, but they were also kind to Ricardo. They had all heard his story. Some had seen the viral video. Others had attended the gala. They respected his voice and his dedication, even if he was new to the professional world. The lead soprano, a woman named Angela Torres, took Ricardo under her wing. She was in her 40s with a magnificent voice and decades of experience. During breaks, she would give Ricardo advice about everything from vocal health to dealing with stage nerves, to navigating the politics of the opera world. The thing people do not understand about opera, Angela told him one day, is that it is not just about having a beautiful voice. Lots of people have beautiful voices. What matters is dedication, discipline, and the ability to keep going even when things are difficult. From what I have seen, you have all of that. Ricardo was grateful for her guidance. He was learning that being an opera singer was not just about the singing. It was about being part of a community, a tradition that stretched back hundreds of years. He was not just learning a role. He was learning a whole new way of life. The documentary crew continued to follow his journey. They filmed rehearsals, training sessions, and quiet moments of Ricardo studying his score. They interviewed the people around him. Dr. Foster spoke about taking risks on raw talent. Professor Chen discussed the technical progress Ricardo had made. Maria and James shared their memories of working with Ricardo when he was still a janitor. One day, the crew asked Ricardo to take them to his old apartment building, to the neighborhood where he had lived with his grandmother. Ricardo had not been back there in years. The building looked smaller than he remembered, more run down. The neighborhood had changed. Some stores he remembered were gone. New ones had taken their place. They climbed the stairs to what had been his grandmother's apartment. Different people lived there now, but the landlord had given permission for them to film outside the door. Ricardo stood in the hallway, remembering. This is where it started, he told the camera. Right here. My grandmother playing those old records, me sitting on the floor listening, dreaming. She told me I could sing in great opera houses someday. I did not believe it was possible. But she believed it. And somehow her belief planted something in me that never died. His voice broke slightly. I wish she could see this. I wish she could know that her dream came true. The documentary producer asked Ricardo to sing something right there in the hallway. in the place where he had first fallen in love with opera. Ricardo thought for a moment, then began to sing very quietly, one of the arias from his grandmother's old records. His voice echoed in the narrow hallway, the same hallway where he had played as a child. An elderly woman opened her apartment door and peeked out. When she saw Ricardo singing, she smiled and listened. Then another door opened and another. People came out to see what was happening. By the time Ricardo finished, half a dozen neighbors were watching, some with tears in their eyes. One old woman approached him. "That was beautiful," she said. "Are you a professional singer?" "I am trying to be," Ricardo said. "Well, you should be," the woman said firmly. "You have a gift." "God bless you." The months passed quickly. Rehearsals became more intense as opening night approached. Ricardo rehearsed his scenes over and over until he could do them in his sleep. He learned where to stand, when to move, how to interact with the other singers. He learned to project his voice over the orchestra without straining. He learned to stay in character even when he was not singing. Professor Chen remained demanding, never quite satisfied. But Ricardo had learned that this was the professor's way. He pushed because he cared, because he wanted Ricardo to be the best he could possibly be. 2 weeks before opening night, they held the first dress rehearsal. This was the first time they would run through the entire opera with full costumes, makeup, lighting, and orchestra. It was like a real performance, except the audience seats were empty. Ricardo wore his costume, which had been made by the theater's costume department. When he looked at himself in the dressing room mirror, fully costumed and made up, he got out of bed and looked at his grandmother's photograph. "Tomorrow," he whispered to her. "Tomorrow I sing for you." Opening night arrived. Ricardo spent the day trying to stay calm. He did light vocal warm-ups, not wanting to tire his voice before the performance. He ate a small, careful meal. He tried to rest, though he could not really sleep. He arrived at the theater 3 hours before curtain, wanting plenty of time to prepare. The dressing room he had been assigned was small but private. His costume hung waiting for him. His makeup kit was laid out on the counter. A bouquet of flowers sat on the table with a card. It was from the cleaning staff, all of them chipping in. "We always knew you were special," the card said. "Make us proud. You already have." Ricardo sat at the makeup mirror and began to prepare. The ritual of getting into costume and makeup helped calm his nerves. With each step, he transformed from Ricardo Morales into the character he would play. By the time he was fully dressed and made up, he felt ready. There was a knock on his dressing room door. 30 minutes to curtain, the stage manager called. Ricardo made his way to the backstage area. Other singers were warming up, doing last-minute checks of their costumes, dealing with their own pre-performance nerves. Angela Torres saw him and came over. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," Ricardo admitted. "Good," Angela said with a smile. "If you are not nervous, you do not care enough. Use that fear. Let it sharpen your focus. You are going to be wonderful." Through the curtain, Ricardo could hear the audience arriving. The seats were filling up. 800 people would be watching tonight. Maria was out there somewhere, and James and Katie and many others who had supported him. Dr. Foster would be there. Professor Chen would be there. The documentary crew was there with their cameras. Critics from newspapers and magazines were there. And somewhere Ricardo believed his grandmother was there too, watching from wherever she was, proud of the little boy who had sat on the floor and listened to scratchy records and dared to dream. The orchestra began to tune. The sound of instruments warming up filtered backstage. Then came the announcement over the speaker system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The performance will begin in 5 minutes. Please turn off all cell phones and electronic devices. Thank you, 5 minutes." Ricardo's heart pounded. His hands were cold. His mouth was dry. He did his breathing exercises, centering himself. The stage manager appeared. "Places for Act 1, everyone. Places, please." The singers who appeared in the first act moved to their positions. Ricardo's entrance was not until the second act, so he would wait backstage. But he went to the wings anyway, wanting to watch, wanting to feel the energy of the performance. The house lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The conductor entered the orchestra pit, and the audience applauded politely. He raised his baton, and the opera began. Ricardo watched from the wings as the first act unfolded. The lead singers were magnificent. The orchestra was powerful. The staging was beautiful. He was part of this. He was actually part of a real opera production, Act 1 ended. The curtain came down. Intermission. Ricardo returned to his dressing room to prepare. His scene was first in Act 2. He had about 20 minutes. He did more breathing exercises. He reviewed his blocking one more time, walking through the movements in his small dressing room. He sang through a few phrases very quietly, checking that his voice was ready. Act 2 places. 5 minutes to Act 2. The stage manager's voice came over the speaker. This was it. Ricardo made his way to his entrance position. He could hear the audience returning to their seats after intermission. He could hear the orchestra warming up again. Angela Torres was nearby. She reached over and squeezed his hand. "Break a leg," she whispered, using the traditional theater good luck phrase. The curtain rose on Act 2. The scene was set. Other singers were already on stage, beginning the act. Ricardo waited in the wings, counting the lines, knowing exactly when his entrance would come. Then he heard his cue. The moment had arrived. Ricardo stepped onto the stage. The bright lights hit him. He could feel the presence of 800 people watching, even though he could not see them clearly beyond the lights. This was the moment he had dreamed about his entire life. Everything had led to this. All the years of secret practice, all the lonely nights, all the doubt and fear and hope. It all came down to this moment. Ricardo opened his mouth and began to sing. His voice rang out clear and true, filling the theater. The months of training with Professor Chen, the natural gift he had been born with, his love for the music, his years of dedication. All of it came together in this moment. He was not nervous anymore. He was not scared. He was doing exactly what he was meant to do. He was home. The scene continued. Ricardo sang his lines, interacted with the other performers, moved through the blocking. He became the character. He told the story. He made music that touched the hearts of everyone listening. When his scene ended and he exited the stage, he had to lean against the wall backstage for a moment.
He had done it.
He had actually done it. His first professional opera performance. And it had gone well. He could feel it. He had connected with the audience. He had told the story he was meant to tell. The opera continued. Ricardo had 2 more scenes in Act 3. He performed them with growing confidence. By his final exit, he felt like he was flying. This was what he was born to do. The opera reached its conclusion. The final note sounded. The curtain came down. Then it rose again for the curtain call. The supporting singers came out first, taking their bows. Ricardo stood in line with the other supporting performers. When it was his turn, he stepped forward and bowed. The applause was warm and appreciative. But then something unexpected happened. As Ricardo bowed, the applause grew louder. People began to stand. Not everyone, but many. They knew his story. They had come specifically to see him, and they wanted to show their support. Ricardo bowed again, his eyes stinging with tears he tried to hold back. The lead singers came out for their bows, receiving their standing ovation. Then the entire cast stood together, bowing as one. When the curtain finally came down for the last time, Ricardo stood backstage with the other singers, all of them exhausted and exhilarated. They hugged each other, congratulated each other. Angela Torres hugged Ricardo tightly. "You did it," she said. "You are an opera singer now." Really and truly. Ricardo could only nod, too emotional to speak. Back in his dressing room, Ricardo removed his costume and makeup slowly, savoring every moment. This night would stay with him forever. His first professional performance. His debut. The night his impossible dream became real. There was a knock on his door. He opened it to find Dr. Foster, Professor Chen, and a crowd of his friends. Maria rushed in and hugged him, crying. James shook his hand vigorously. Katie took 100 photos. Mr. Chen, his old supervisor, told him how proud he was. Dr. Foster waited until the others had finished. Then she approached Ricardo with a serious expression. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I received a call during intermission. It was from the Metropolitan Opera House." Ricardo's heart stopped. The Metropolitan Opera, the Met, one of the most famous opera houses in the world. "They have been following your story," Dr. Foster continued. "They watched the documentary footage. They heard about tonight's performance. They want you to audition for their Young Artist program. It is one of the most prestigious training programs in the world. If you get in, it could launch your career at the highest level." Ricardo could not speak. The Metropolitan Opera. He had seen pictures of that theater in books. His grandmother had talked about it like it was a palace, a temple of music, and they wanted him to audition. "I know this is overwhelming," Dr. Foster said gently, "and you do not have to decide anything tonight. Just know that doors are opening for you, Ricardo. Big doors. Your journey is only beginning." Later that night, after everyone had left, Ricardo walked through the empty theater one last time. He stood on the stage looking out at the rows of seats. This stage where he had sung tonight, this stage where, a year ago, he had cleaned the floors late at night singing to empty chairs. He thought about his journey. From invisible janitor to professional opera singer, from secret dreamer to someone whose story inspired others. It seemed impossible, but it had happened. Ricardo looked up at the ceiling, at the beautiful chandelier sparkling in the dim light. "Thank you, Abuela," he whispered. "Thank you for the records. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for believing in me when I was just a little boy with impossible dreams." He could almost hear her voice in response. Not words exactly, but a feeling. Warmth, pride, love, and a message that seemed to say, "This is only the beginning." Ricardo smiled. He turned off the stage lights and walked toward the exit. Tomorrow there would be another performance. And the day after, another one. His life as an opera singer had begun. The journey would be long, with challenges he could not yet imagine. But he was ready. As he pushed open the stage door and stepped out into the cool night air, Ricardo began to hum. Then, because no one was around to hear, he began to sing. His voice rose into the night, clear and strong and filled with joy. Somewhere above, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The janitor had found his voice.